In this tutorial, I want to talk to you guys about while loops in C. Now, a while loop is basically a structure in the C programming language that we can use to loop over and continually execute a specific block of code until a certain condition is false. So I can specify a condition, and then I can basically just loop over a bunch of code until that condition is no longer true. And loops can be really useful. There's a lot of times in our programs where we're going to want to continually do something while something else is true or while a certain condition is met. And I'm going to show you guys a really basic while loop in this tutorial, and then in the next tutorial we're actually going to build a really cool guessing game using while loops. So it should be pretty fun, and you should get a pretty good idea of how these things work. The first thing I want to do, and this isn't directly related to creating a while loop though, is I want to create an integer. So I'm just going to create an integer called index, and I'm going to set it equal to 1. Now what I want to do is I want to actually create a while loop, and you guys will see where this index comes into play. So in order to create a while loop, I can just type out while, an open and close parentheses, and then an open and closed curly bracket. And this is basically the outline, sort of the template for our while loop. Basically how this is going to work is, up here in these parentheses, I'm going to specify a condition. And as long as that condition is true, I'm going to loop through all of the code inside of these curly brackets. So inside of these curly brackets, I'm going to put a bunch of code. And as long as the condition in these parentheses is true, I'm going to execute all that code. So up here, we're going to specify a condition. I'm going to specify a condition that index is less than or equal to 5. So while index is less than or equal to 5, I want to execute all the code inside of here. So I'm going to put some code in here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to print out the value of index. So over here, I'm just going to say we want to print out an integer, and I'm just going to print out index. So we'll be printing out index, and actually, why don't we print out a new line every time too? There we go. And finally, after this, I want to increment the index variable. So I can just say index is equal to index plus 1. Basically, I'm adding 1 onto the index every time. And actually, I want to show you guys something in C. There's going to be a lot of situations where you're going to want to do something like this. Basically, add 1 to an existing variable. And in C, there's actually a shortcut we can use. So I can come over here and I can just say index plus plus, and this is going to do the same thing. So this is just going to add 1 to the index. Essentially what I'm doing is I'm saying I want to print out index, and then I want to increment index. And I'm going to keep looping through this code while index is less than or equal to 5. So let's go ahead and run this program, and maybe you can predict what's going to happen. You'll see over here I'm printing out the numbers 1 through 5. So I'm printing out 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And let me walk you guys through exactly what's happening in this loop. Over here, we create this index variable and we set it equal to 1. And basically, when C goes to execute this program, the first thing it's going to do before it does anything else is it's going to look at this condition, and it's going to check the condition. And it's going to say, okay, is index less than or equal to 5? Well, the first time through, index is equal to 1. So it's definitely less than 5. C is going to go through, it's going to execute this line of code, printing out 1. Then it's going to execute this line of code, incrementing index. Then what C is going to do is it's going to come all the way back up here, and it's going to check this condition again. So it's going to say, okay, is index less than or equal to 5? And index at this point is equal to 2, so it's less than 5. So it's going to go through, execute this line of code, execute this line of code. Now index is equal to 3, and C is going to go all the way back up to the top. It's going to check this condition again. So before C goes through this loop, it's always going to check the condition first. So before it's allowed to go and execute that code again, it has to check the condition to make sure that it's true. Eventually, we're going to get to a situation where index gets incremented, and it gets incremented up to 6. Then C is going to come back up here, and it's going to check to see if 6 is less than or equal to 5. It's going to be false, and we're going to move on with our lives in the program. And that's the basics of while loops. So this seems very simple, and that's because it is. All we do is specify a condition. As long as that condition's true, we keep doing all this stuff in here. And there's tons of situations where while loops are going to come in handy. This is just one of them where we can print out numbers between 1 and 5. I also do want to point out one thing that you might want to watch out for, which is called an infinite loop. And an infinite loop is a situation where this condition up here never becomes false. So this condition will just always stay true. And there's certain circumstances where you're going to want to use something like an infinite loop, but in a lot of circumstances, you're not going to want to go anywhere near something like that. So let me just demonstrate so you guys can see. So if I stopped incrementing this, if I just got rid of index plus plus, now when I run my program, you'll see that it's just continually printing out ones. I mean, look at all these ones that are getting printed out. You can see like the text editor is kind of going crazy. This program is just, it keeps executing through that loop, and it's still going right now. So this would keep going forever if I let it, keep going infinitely, hence the name. So I'm just gonna terminate this, but that'll kind of show you like how an infinite loop works, and you definitely wanna watch out for that because you'll get into situations as you work with while loops where they'll just become infinite, and you need to watch out for that, especially if you're doing something a little bit more advanced where you're like siphoning off memory or you're creating processes or something. It can slow your computer down quite a bit. So this is a while loop, and this is a really great loop. There's also one other type of loop that's similar to a while loop that I want to talk to you guys about. And before I do that, I just want to do something really quick. So I'm going to set this index equal to 6. Right? I'm going to set this equal to 6, and I'm going to run my program. And what you're going to notice is nothing's going to get printed out. So the code inside of this while loop isn't going to print out because the first thing we always do when we run this while loop is we check this condition. So the first thing C is going to do before it prints anything, before it increments anything, it's going to check this condition. And if it's false, it's not going to do any of this stuff. So when I run this program, you'll see nothing's going to get printed out. And that's exactly what happens. There's another type of loop that's similar to a while loop, which is called a do while loop. And I'm going to show you how to make one. All you have to do is take this while thing up here and paste it down here below. And then up here, I'm just going to say do. And a do while loop is similar to a while loop, but the first thing a do while loop does, instead of checking this condition down here, is it executes all of this code. So even though index is equal to 6, we're still going to print out 6, and we're still going to increment it. And then we're going to check the condition to see if we can keep looping. So let me show you guys this, and this should illustrate what this is doing. And actually, I need to put a semicolon here. So you can see over here, we're printing out 6. So unlike before when we just used that while loop, now because we're using a do while loop, we're doing whatever was inside of that loop before we're checking the condition. And there's going to be certain circumstances where a do while loop will come in handy. I would say by far while loops are way more common. But just, it's good to know about do while loops because there are certain circumstances where they'll come in handy. Basically, anytime you don't want to be checking the condition first, you can use a do while loop. But those are the two basic types, and there's actually another type of loop that we'll talk about later in the course, which is called a for loop. But for now, we're going to have some fun with while loops, and in the next tutorial, we're going to be building a little guessing game.